it is very stressful to be a manager. You have to handle people. Sometimes you have to fire them, as you say. So how someone can deal with this?
I've been working with these people, for example, for a couple of years. I'm really invested in them as individuals, as the person behind the title, right? So saying goodbye to those people, even though it's from a financial perspective, you might not have a choice. It might be a question of survival for the company. So it's really just a rational decision, but it does suck. I feel that I am the bad guy, even though it's really my job title that makes me have to do this thing that feels really bad.
All right. So, Johan, thank you for having us. Let's start with some introductory. Who is Johan? What do you do exactly? Tell us about your companies, the book that you wrote.
Thank you guys, first of all for being in Stockholm. That's pretty awesome. Welcome to the offices. My name is Johan. I spent a career around really affecting change in the context of big companies. So I started off as a management consultant, and then did that for 5 years, and I was a chief strategy officer for, let's say, 4 years during a phase where we had a management consultant company that specialized in execution when it comes to strategy. So not necessarily the formation of strategy, but the execution part. So that used to be a management consultant company, and then we pivoted that to a software company doing the same thing. So I was the strategy officer during that period, which meant both like external financing, a lot of stuff. But one of the benefits that I had during those years is that actually in my job description was keeping track of all of the kind of management science that's publicized every month of, Harvard Business Review and stuff like that. So I read so much during that time. And then we started building a strategy execution platform. So I've had the benefit for the book to kind of witness strategy being executed across so many companies, so many teams. So in the book, I have like a data set of over 5,000 teams, all the way up from like the CEO and the management team, all the way down to like the frontline teams to kind of follow. So whenever we kind of introduced a change to the methodology or to the software, we could really see, is this effective or not? And then for me, like once you've done something for like 10, 15 years, you realize, wow, I kind of know a little bit about this subject by now. And when it comes to strategy and strategy execution, like the mistakes you make as a company, they're kind of simple to fix. So the idea with the book was really like, if we fix these maybe 4 or 5 things, that could have a massive impact for our ability to execute things. And I'm a father of 2, so for like one of the things that is really driving me is like strategy execution is also about the ability to combat the big things, right? Global climate change, or like the invention of AI that might be either awesome or really scary. So our ability to get where we want to get is like super crucial. So that was like my idea behind the book, like the ability to help younger leaders invest in their skills to drive change. Because I think that's like the increasing speed of change will be really a constant in business for the future. So it's like a really good investment to make if you're a young manager or up and coming potential leader, to invest in your skills in affecting change. And the book is kind of a handbook for how to do that.
Great. I agree with what you said actually, and I love your approach. Also, as you mentioned, the small details play a crucial role. Sometimes, though, I think we find it hard to spot these details. Like, tell me your opinion, how hard it can be to map out all the processes to find these details that you mentioned in your book that can drive change.
So a big part of what goes wrong in strategy is that, like, I love working with C-level people. That's been my career the last 10 years, like working with the CEO and the CFO and the CTOs. They're like crazily ambitious, they're smart, they're intelligent, they're likable. But a core part of why strategy is failing is the first part of that sentence, ambitious. Yeah, so you're so much more like what you want to execute, your ambition, it far outstrips your ability to execute. So what ends up happening in these companies is that you have so many goals, but it's a zero-sum time or a zero-sum game with time. So the more goals you have, the more you kind of start spreading out your organizational resources in different directions. So from a science perspective, there's an inverse relationship between the number of goals that you have and the number of goals that you can execute. So one of the first things to fix is actually saying we need to look at all of your, typically you'd have between 10 and 30 parallel goals at the management team. We need to look at, out of this list of 25, let's say, what are the top 2 or 3 most important goals, and figure that out in the company. And what ends up happening is that if you really isolate the right goals, a lot of the other goals, they tend to follow along. So say that one goal that you end up finding is like, we really need to land more clients. So that might have an impact of a bunch of other different goals as well. It might partially solve your cost saving issues, because if you make more money in, you can be more efficient and stuff like that. So isolating the key things. Another interesting part of your question then goes to like the strategic details. So these really high level managers, they tend not to be detail oriented people. And in strategy, details can really sometimes be like, there's a difference between like details on how does the copier machine work at the office, like sure, delegate that to somebody else. And then there's strategic details, which can be really the difference between something that is highly, highly effective and something that won't work at all. And part of what I do is help these really senior managers in nailing their, let's call it a milestone plan. So that the ability to say in 3 years, we need to be over here. What does that actually mean in 2 years' time, in 1 year time? What does that mean for the milestones that we need to hit the coming 2 quarters, let's say? And what does that mean for this week? And when you plan for strategy, the normal process that you do is that you look in your calendar next week and see, I know that we want to digitalize more, and what kind of time do I have available next week? And it's like, yeah, I have an hour on Wednesday afternoon. I'll try to squeeze in like a focused time block on Wednesday. And then Wednesday rolls around, and then like your email inbox is overflowing, so you just push it a week. But if you like flip the planning, you should start from like the end goal and realize what does that actually mean moving backwards, reverse engineering it. You start realize like, whoa, I spent so little time on this in relationship to what I need to spend, and we're probably already behind. So it's reshuffling of these senior leaders' calendars, and that's going to be true on all levels of the organization as well.
Exactly, and at the end of the day, the direction is really important. Like, even if you go slow or if you go fast, you need to go at a specific target, and that's where strategy comes in. Like, if you are going because you missed these little details to the wrong direction, then you are losing a very crucial time.
And I'll tell you a super interesting study on this. So MIT published a huge study. I think it was more than 4,000 companies, 80,000 respondents, looking at specifically what you're mentioning now. It's about alignment. What is our ability to kind of understand the direction similarly? So they asked the CEO, really what I just said as part of the crucial solution, like what are the 3 most important things for this company? So they asked the CEO that question. What the CEO answered then became kind of the correct answer. And then they started going out in the same organizations asking the same question. What is the most important goals for this company? Not for your role, but for this company. And they would expect similar results. But it started, like the deviations were already in the management team. It was only 51% in the management team that said the same 3 priorities as the CEO. So you start deviating in terms of like, what do we feel is important? And obviously this problem amplifies as you move out in these organizations. So at the employee level, it was only 13% that would name the same priorities as they did from the C-suite. So it becomes like a game of Chinese whispers. Do you know that expression? So when somebody says something, and then you probably did it at kindergarten. So I would whisper something in your ear, and you do the same thing, and what came back.
Else.
Yeah. But that's really what's happening in companies. So it's being translated manager by manager to get to the front line. And when it reaches the front line, it's something completely different. It's interpreted by what do you think is important and what do you think is important, rather than that kind of aligned direction. So that's a huge problem to fix. And that's partly what I do, I build strategy execution software, and a big element of that is obviously the ability to visualize the alignment in terms of how things tie together, and enabling for lower level employees to see the big picture, and how does my contribution on a weekly basis really make an impact on a bigger goal, let's say.
I would love to hear how do you think this can be fixed. But before asking that, I would like your comment on 80-20 rule, that it's all about prioritization. And you mentioned before, like, there are some things that you need to focus first. Like, please tell me about this.
So one thing I feel when it comes to strategy is that there's a lot of behavior change in strategy. So we've been this company. Let's think of an example. Let's say you're a bank, but it's 10, 15 years ago. And it's pretty obvious that this whole industry is going towards digital banking. It's a question of time, perhaps. But all of your organization currently is built around the idea of local bank branches. So all of the big centers of where you have your employees is going to be at the bank offices and so forth. So when you say our strategy is digital banking, it doesn't necessarily mean that tomorrow we're a digital bank suddenly. So it's going to be a question of time. So when it comes to investing time into strategy, there's actually been studies that's looked at how much time should you dedicate to kind of these activities and investments that has an payoff horizon that's longer than maybe this quarter or this half year or whenever my next bonus is, versus how much should I do the stuff that are answering the customer emails and stuff like that. And they looked at, or they said that the financially high performing companies, they spend roughly 10% of their time on these kind of strategic activities. So that would be an afternoon a week. That's what good looks like. So it's not less than that, because then you're just kind of fighting fires and you're going to be stuck all of the time at the same place. But it's not necessarily more than that either. So say that you can free up an afternoon a week for strategic tasks. Then it becomes, okay, what do I actually do on those 4 hours on a Wednesday afternoon? And becoming really clear, and I think this is an awesome exercise to do in coming back to your 80-20 rule, on an activity level, there are for sure, or it is for sure true, that a minority of the activities will drive the majority of the results. But what the problem is with strategic activities, and I write about this in the book as well, that our brains are still kind of caveman brain. We haven't evolved that much, which means that for strategic activities, there's a couple of things or tricks that our minds, they play on us that makes this very, very difficult. So one thing is that the amygdala in our brain, which is the kind of fight or flight impulse, it loves to react. So we get fooled every week when it comes to like urgent things, and we confuse them with important. So the angry customer email will always feel like when I have this time slot of 4 hours on a Wednesday afternoon, I always have a tendency to prioritize the urgent email, even though that's super operational, won't move the needle in the strategic direction.
I can relate with this.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to look for activities that are really proactive. And that's where, from a management perspective, you'd want some type of steering, like...
Step back a bit?
No, the opposite. So you need to step into that, actually trying to create... Because you don't have a deadline necessarily on the strategic activities normally. You can always push it a week.
Yeah, I mean, step back to see the bigger picture on...
That's true, yeah.
What is the most important task to do?
Sorry, I misunderstood you. I think that's a crucial point for managers, having that ability to periodically step back, for sure.
And see,
yeah. What I meant by step in is that you probably in your team need to be more hands-on in ensuring that these strategic activities really get done, because they will always be eaten up by kind of the whirlwind of your day-to-day tasks otherwise. So we run a team process every week, which is really similar to, you guys are part of you are engineers, as I understand it, or at least have a lot of exposure to that. So within Agile, you have the stand-up, right? So every day you debrief, what did you promise to do yesterday, and what do you want to do today? And that's just running every day. we have a similar process, but it's not on a daily cadence. It's on a weekly or a bi-weekly cadence. But you do fundamentally the same thing. And what you want to do is to create a synthetic deadline on these more strategic activities. And the deadline is, I know that we will talk about these in the group on Monday, for example. So the deadline, I can't just push it and nobody notices, because that's what's going to happen otherwise. If you just have the activity documented in a PowerPoint deck and I'm just going to revisit this by the end of the semester, like I forget about it.
I wanted to ask you, as the company CEO, how can you share the vision to the employees of the front line?
So I think, one, it still comes back to priority. So a lot about strategy is going to be communication. With fewer goals, it's much simpler to communicate. So again, if you can choose, like, these are the 2 or 3 or 4 perhaps most important bets that we do, and you continually communicate this, I think a really well thought out strategy has the ability to really put a lot of pressure on kind of the pivot points that really will make you stand out in your industry. And if you can make that business logic, like not just this is the goal, but why is this the goal? What do we expect to happen? And how does that interlock with like our current business model or where we think the business is going in a few years? So I think clarity is so much the key. And the truth is that a simple but well communicated and well executed strategy will beat a very elegant but poorly understood strategy. So sometimes strategy can feel daunting. Like you can try to be more than you are in a sense and make it hyper complex to the point that nobody really understands it, and you're really doing yourself a disservice there. And especially if you are the CEO or in your audience perhaps, I think you need to respect that by the point that you make a decision, you've probably been thinking about this for a quarter, half a year. You might have had 10 discussions with other knowledgeable people. You've had management consultants helping you and so forth. You're really far along in your process of understanding why these decisions are. And then you come at the point, okay, this is good enough for me now to start communicating. From the recipient's point of view, that's the first time that I hear about this. So you need to be very, very consistent over time. And I think almost every CEO that I've worked with, they overestimate their own clarity and they underestimate how often they need to communicate the same kind of strategy template or the same pillars of the strategy to their organization.
One another question was, how do you become a good manager? What are the first steps you need to take? Because growing fast, sometimes it's confusing.
Yeah, that's a big question. I do think, especially when you're talking about first-time managers, I think it would be interesting to know how much this is a cultural thing, because my primary experience is within the Nordics, and now we're doing a lot of business in the United States, and I see similar things. I don't know how this translates to Greek culture, but at least from my experience, one of the biggest hurdles for first-time managers is, well, it's 2 things really. First off, you're moving from a expert position where you're used to doing all of the work yourself to being efficient at delegating tasks and leading through others. I think you're very unclear in general when you're delegating. So you need to have that within the military, you do a lot of double command. So I give you a command and then I ask you, can you please repeat back to me what you think I gave you the task? And it's within that you repeating back that we see this delegation really come through. Having that clarity, and especially if you're a new manager or working with new people, I think that can be really, really beneficial, because what you can do is that you can hinder a lot of kind of double work. And by double work, I mean that I gave you a task, you understood it differently than I thought you did. You do the work, come back to me, and I say, this is not what I wanted. So that's really, like, it's frustrating for you, it's frustrating for me, nobody wins, right? So that double commando, even though it can feel, I think you can be afraid of it feeling like micromanagement or that you're really like on them. I think that saves so much time and becomes so much more nice to work under. if you're a member. And that comes to the second thing. I think newer managers, they overemphasize the point of being liked by their teams. I was in a podcast discussing, can you as a manager be both very empathic and liked by your team and still be very direct? And I think that the guest that I was with, or the other person, she kind of reframed that in a nice way, I think. Like, one of the nicest things you can be is being very clear. Because that gives kind of, for your employee, it gives a clear understanding of what does good look like. And I think, having worked with this for so many years, there are so many people in companies that don't really know on Friday afternoon, was this a good week for me when it comes to strategic execution? Like, can I high five myself and take a weekend with a good conscience or not? So I think it's really a nice way of being a nice manager by being very clear. So those two things I would say be, and then obviously the question is so big, like, how are you a great manager? It's a huge question. But those, for new managers, I would say, are two things that you typically miss.
Thank you. Another concern I have is we need to hire more experienced executives. What are the traits we are looking in an experienced? Because the problem is that some of those executives have worked more lives than we live, because we are 23 years old. So it's more difficult to manage one of those executives that are essential for the business growth.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think one of the things that comes with experience is what you were talking about before, that ability to step back and not be as like high pulse, high stress, just because, for example, I've been through a financial downturn before. I've seen this. And if you're a new manager, just being in that situation is extremely stressful. And then maybe laying off people for the first time is super. It's a task that nobody likes, but if you've done it before, you can still kind of manage through it. I do think bringing on external and more experienced people, you are going to be like that experience, especially if it's coming from, let's say, a really big company into a more startup environment. You really need to think about fit as well. So I really think that when you're hiring, it's so much about not just do you have the experience, but will your experience shine here? Is this the right place for you? And that's not necessarily true in all cases. I do think there's a lot of things happening now, especially on the technical aspect, where the more experienced managers are struggling to kind of keep up with like both simple things in terms of like, how do we communicate in a modern company? It's mostly going to be by Slack or some type of message like that, and they're over relying on like meetings and emails, for example. But it's going to be other things as well, like the AI tools. Like, how do I really think about multiplying my own impact through having like AI agents that do my social media or do my whatever it might be?
I would like to ask about the stressful situations that you have been. And I don't know if you have described this into the book. Like, it is very stressful to be a manager. You have to handle people. Sometimes you have to fire them, as you say. So how someone can deal with this?
Again, a big question. I do think I had a conversation, again, going back to conversations that I've had recently. On my podcast, I had a retired Swedish general on, like a military guy. He was a general for 20 years in Sweden. And he said that one of the things that more junior people struggle a lot with is negative feedback. And I do think being a manager, if you're not comfortable with yourself and who you are, you take things so personally. And that's super difficult and kind of adds to the weight. So I can just speak for myself. I've had a year or two I've been doing pretty intensely, because I've just came out of, I have two smallish kids, 4 and 7, and those years are going to be crazy stressful, especially if you add on a career onto that one. You're going to feel bad at two jobs, both the job that pays you and the job that is being a father. But now I've kind of exited the most intense years. So I've invested a lot in kind of my personal growth, and I think one of the results of that will be that I'm way more knowledgeable about my strengths and weaknesses, and I do think that's an investment for any manager in practices of it might be as simple as mindfulness or whatever it might be, and especially during periods of intense stress, such as big layoffs, for example, is it tremendously stressful as a manager. Because at least to me, I've been working with these people, for example, for a couple of years. I'm really invested in them as individuals, as the person behind the title, right? So saying goodbye to those people, even though it's from a financial perspective, you might not have a choice. It might be a question of survival for the company. So it's really just a rational decision, but it does suck, really does. Nobody likes that. With experience, I mean, I've sadly have to do it a couple of times during my career. This is not my first financial crisis as a manager, so you can lean on that and lean on. I do think it's a good idea to have a few, let's call it confidence, like close friends that you can really talk to. And one of the things that does worry me right now is obviously there's like an epidemic of loneliness. I've seen a lot of studies that people don't necessarily have that close friends, and I do think that has, at least for me, helped me a lot during those times, being really, really open with what I struggle with, but not necessarily to a colleague, but to a partner, to close friends. That has helped me a lot, and kind of separate yourself. Because what you end up doing, at least me, I feel that I am the bad guy, even though it's really my job title that makes me have to do this thing that feels really bad. It doesn't mean that me as a person is that bad guy. So kind of that separation can help. But I don't know, I experience is probably the biggest.
Okay, so you referenced before artificial intelligence and AI tools. So I would like to ask how it is to integrate these AI tools in the corporate work.
Great question again. I think it's not going to be one answer. So one of the things that I build now in terms of actual features that are AI enabled, so obviously I build strategy execution software. One of the benefits is that we have a lot of metadata, let's call it, on the different teams in our platform. So we know what industry type they're in, we know what team type they are, like a finance team, an IT team, whatever. We know what goals they optimize for. So we can use all of that data to generate really, really good advice on what should we concretely do in terms of our plans. So I think those type of helpers will massively increase the ability to do that kind of step back, which is one of the most difficult things for any manager, really, because everybody's in that whirlwind. I do think for my own, I talk a lot with my team, especially now that we're seeing kind of the first generation of AI tools coming out, is that none of these tools yet are good enough to substitute anybody, really. But what I talk with my teams, and I run 3 teams of engineers, 35 people roughly, is that AI won't replace you, but people that augment themselves using AI perhaps will. So get in early and invest in your own skills early. I try out new AI tools almost on a weekly basis. Like, it's that intense. You were laughing at my laptop before. You saw that I both had Gemini and ChatGPT as shortcut icons on my desktop. Like, I use it all the time. You have to talk about long-term and short-term with AI. I think the coming year for me is to think about AI almost as a team ecosystem. That when I come to work, I bring a couple of AI helpers along with me. Now, for example, for the book, obviously, there's a lot of social media. So I can have my content guy, girl AI, and I can have my whatever. So I have a couple of skills available. And I think that's a reasonable way of looking at it more from an individual perspective. That, like, what are the tasks around me that I can really get expertise from, and think about them more as colleagues than just automators. So you can bounce ideas, and as these grow better, I expect it will be easier to integrate as users with AI, because currently you almost have to be an enthusiast to get a lot of value of it. Yes, you can get an answer, but it's not that much better than Google, right? But in a few years, I think we'll see more and more tools integrate AI. I think in the context of business, a huge thing will be just decision support. So all of this data that we generate almost as trash data currently, can we really utilize to take a lot better decisions? So the whole area of business intelligence for me is one of the big areas that will massively have a positive impact as a consequence of AI.
There is so much data that I think we have reached the limit that we are unable to harness and process. So this is a gap for AI to come in and help us. And again, because I hear this discussion all the time, or this question, is AI good or bad? And for me, it's very simple, like an answer. It's just a tool. Depends on how you use it. Every time in society and humanity, developing tools made us evolve, right? And being faster and more effective, and machines came, all this stuff. At the end of the day, do you use AI for creating deepfake videos, or do you use AI for accelerating, for example, your work, or even trying to find new treatments for cancer?
Exactly, absolutely. And I think one thing that frustrates me, like building products around AI and selling services that are AI enabled, it's really frustrating that the kind of compliance legislation around AI is very slow and seems to end up in different regional models. So for me, it would be so much more beneficial if there was some type of international agreement on these are the legislative, both faster development of what will be the ultimate legislation for AI, but also having it a less EU or versus US centric models, because I do think we as a product, for example, we struggle with that because it seems like whatever, because we obviously do business in Europe and in the States. So and this has been true even before AI, that we have a lot of compliance, like personal privacy issues, GDPR, stuff like that, completely different in the US. And the same will be true for AI, like how much can you do, how much of the user's data can you use in order to serve them better advice or whatever. Yeah.
So as an engineer myself, I find it very beneficial to use AI in terms of my work. So it has accelerated my work by X5, which is something that terrifies me positively. And I think that in 10 years that it will be superior of everything that we have used in our lifetimes. So I believe that anyone who now adopts the AI tools and approaches AI as a way of accelerating his work, he will be ahead of the others by miles.
Yeah, it's way easier to keep up than to catch up. So if you're not actively investing already in your AI skills, you'll have guys that are 5 times more effective, like running past you, and by that point, it will be really difficult to catch up. So I think it's an imperative for any like aspirational person that are somewhere around things that will scale to start using AI. If you're in a field that isn't dependent on scale, so you're a hairdresser, well, sure, ignore AI, it might not matter that much to you. But most of us in the trades that we do will have a massive dependency on our ability to kind of augment ourselves with AI. I make the same analysis you do.
Okay, so as an engineer myself, in many times that I work with people that are not that have not an engineering background, I see that telling them about my work, it finds difficult to understand what I do or what it takes me to do something that they are going to promote, either it is marketing or sales. So I would like to tell me as a manager, how do you handle this connection between engineering team and the sales or marketing team or HR?
In relation to AI or?
In general, as a business.
So if we talk about in general, I do think, because that's been one of my, I think, value adds as a chief product officer, because I'm not coming from an engineering background. And that has been one of the things that I think makes me actually quite good in terms of running engineering teams, because one of the problems usually is the communication between the business roles and the engineering roles in a company. So engineering cares too little about what happens in the business. Why are we building the things that we're building? More interested in the how are we building them. And from the business roles, you're not involved enough to understand the engineering process, which means that either you don't understand the investments that you try to push for, you don't understand what's big and what's small, and you end up providing a pretty crappy feedback culture from the business people to the engineering teams, because that's what you want. You want that feedback from your customers, and typically engineers are a little bit too introverted to get that information themselves. So what we ended up doing is, because we went through this whole journey, we used to be a management consultant firm, and now we're a software as a service firm. So obviously it's completely different skills, and some of the core team and the management team is still the same. So we really had to relearn, me one of them. And the business development cycle as a software company is much longer than it is, for example, in my case, as a consultant. So we had to relearn, and I had to train my engineering teams in understanding more of the business logic. So that's part of their development tracks when they grow more senior, and part of what is required if you want to move up hierarchically, that you show more interest in the business side. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you need to be driven by a financial bonus or anything, but it needs to mean, for example, that you partake when we run the cross-functional customer feedback sessions. You need to be there, and you need to be actively engaged in that process. And the more I train my engineers in understanding the business logic behind things, the more I can start delegating responsibility outwards, because they understand where we're going more. But it also means training the salespeople to understand the engineering cycle. So I think it needs to be compromises from both sides. And ultimately, as a chief product owner or chief product officer, I'm also the product owner at the end of the day. And it's really that's probably, next to gathering customer feedback, that's my most important job, like stakeholder alignment internally, because I'm in charge of the investments that we make from a product perspective. So really getting all of these different stakeholders, including the customer, aligned on a vision and understand that vision clearly has been one of the bigger challenges of my career, but really also really interesting and intellectually stimulating. That's part of what I really like my job as well. It's a very unexpectedly people-centered job, being a product owner. Before I accepted this job, I lived under the illusion that product management was less customer face time than it ends up being. So I spent a lot of time with customers, and that actually ends up being a really powerful sales tool as well. So I think a lot of people underestimate the power of having like the engineering side, because I'm clearly at the engineering side, even though I'm not an engineer, being able to communicate effectively with the customer. So I meet a lot of people, to be honest, and that's why I mean like social and extrovert role, way more than I thought I would.
Yeah, because you tend to think that you are focused on the product, but actually the customer dictates the product in a way.
In a way, but it's also like you need to innovate on the customer's behalf as well. You can't rely on the customer really understanding their needs. Exactly. They typically express like the top level symptom. Yeah. And that's the innovation that we need to take care of. Like we need to take whatever they communicate as really serious, even though it might seem as a dumb idea. But underneath that dumb idea is probably a need that they're trying to kind of fit together, and really understanding how can we solve it in a way that might be a generic innovation for all our customers.
But you mentioned before that it's very good for an engineer to understand business. And I didn't think of that before. However, it makes sense, as you said. On the other hand, I have to balance a bit. Like, who would you choose if you have to choose one engineer? The one who is geek and or very nerdy with his stuff, full every single detail knowledge about their engineering skills, or someone who is okay, he's a good engineer but also understands business. I think you have something to lose there, but what do you believe about it?
But it's almost impossible to answer. It's like asking on a football field, would you only choose like the star attacker? But you can't build a successful football team with that approach. You need defenders, you need goalkeepers, and I think the same way when I design my teams. So one of my philosophies is that I want you to be shine through with what you're uniquely good at. So I have a few, not the majority of them, but I have a few that would really fit the caricature of the ultra nerdy engineer. I don't necessarily think that it's wise to build a product team that is built majority on that type of skill. It's fantastic, for example, in a back-end team when you're talking about complex infrastructure or security management or stuff like that. It's almost like this super niche skill. And I try to keep them, to be honest, a little bit away from, they don't necessarily need to know that much about the business problem that we solve. But then you have roles, for example, in an engineering team. Obviously, that might be more true for back-end than it is for front-end or UX. So the closer product-wise you are to the customer, the more important I feel it is that you really understand the customer. So for my UX team, I have them with me a lot of times. They take their own customer interviews. They really need to be there. And then my front-end teams, we talk a lot about it. They're less in front of customers. They get more second-hand information, but I really need them to understand more of it. So it's a little bit like, what role do you have in the team?
I get your example about the football team, of course. Maybe you need diverse players to structure the perfect team. But
might depend on the product that you build as well.
Also the size of the team. Like if we are a startup of 3 or 4 people, the key players are very crucial there. Like, and it's a very small team. So if I'm in charge of the business, should the engineer as a co-founder have business knowledge as well? Does it need to be, or the perfect team player for that would be a nerdy engineer?
So one thing that, if I'm gonna push back a little bit on the nerdier and the engineer, a huge cost of building a product is, what is the level to which this feature needs to be engineered? And the nerdier engineer have a tendency to overbuild versus what you reasonably need. So say, for example, that for the coming years, even from your business perspective, the most ambitious growth plan is that you're going to 1,000 users. And then you have an infrastructural engineer that is building something that is capable of serving 10 million users. You're going to spend a lot of money over engineering versus what you actually need. And when it comes to engineering, so much money is in that question of how deep should we go with like the engineering depth of things. So that to me means that I actually think that, especially in a small team, that you need to be aligned on where is the product the coming 2 years. I think it's really important.
Okay, so I'm graduating now, and I was always thinking through my school years, university years, that I need some skills, and I was wondering which skills are the most popular, and not the most popular, but the most useful, the most marketable. So I would like to ask about, let's say, 3 of these, to tell me with your experience in the market.
The skill that I leveraged most in my career is being quite conceptually strong. It's very uncommon, I feel, for people to have the skill to move from vision into the first prototype. It's way more common to have people that can kind of refine the first prototype into a commercial idea. That's a commodity almost. But if you want to stand out and do something that's really kind of unique and marketable, having that kind of first conceptual ability, I think has served me well. I do think communication in any role, like your ability to communicate your ideas, to be heard, like the point around personal branding, I think is increasingly growing. I see a lot of, especially I'm a little bit surprised, 5 years ago, none of my CEO clients talked about personal brand, for example. Now it seems to me that at least 50-70% of my CEOs, and these are for large companies as well, they actually talk about their personal brand. And I think it comes more natural to the younger generation to realize the value of personal brand and your network. I wish I invested stronger in kind of my social media presence initially, because whatever you do, if you have a platform, and I think your podcast is a great example, you can have so much more impact in like the business endeavors that goes along with that. So in investing in your personal brand, I think makes sense. Then early on, I would kind of recommend that you don't specialize too soon. Business is kind of complex, and if you can try a little bit of like sales and marketing, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and build more of a rounded portfolio of what you're really good at, I think that makes sense early on, especially if you're talking about your maybe 20s to 30s. Move companies, see different. That's one of the benefits of being a management consultant, that you're exposed to multiple different industries, business logics, and you get a better understanding of like different types of industries, and you can either do that through consulting or just through moving companies. And finally, I think I've talked a lot with like what my wife and my friends around when you're looking for a job, really reflecting on, look less for a job, look more for the right manager, mentor. Like your direct manager will have such a huge impact on how much you learn, how fast you grow, how fun it is going to the job. So not just go for the position, but really think about what type of manager do I want. That would be a good tip, I think, for younger people.
I would also like to ask about who is Johan, how his personal life, how his daily life is, how he works, how he manages stress and family affairs.
So I'm 38 next week, but still.
You look younger, actually.
Yeah.
I have 2 kids, 4 and 7. I have a wife. We live here in Stockholm. I am actually born here in Stockholm. My wife comes from the northern part of Sweden. I've been working actually in the same company, even though it's really changed over time. I've been here for close to 10 years. I've had almost every job within the company. Like I work I'm the most creative when I have a lot of focus time. I don't like meetings that much. So I'm very, like in terms of planning out my week, I'm very selective on, like what I hate when it happens is like I have meeting an hour in between, meeting an hour in between, like, because you can never get any work done. Yeah. So it's much better to like, for me at least, I'm the most productive in the morning, preferably early morning. So like normally I wake up really early. So perhaps 5:30, I start my day. One of the things that really has made a difference in my life is that we completely stopped digital after 8 p.m. in the morning and before 8:30 in the morning. So I wake up, usually I journal in the morning or read. So I don't really check my phone until I go outside my door. That to me has brought a massive difference in my ability to kind of center myself, focus. I hate waking up to stress. Like that's the worst for me.
That's such a good routine as it sounds. However, as you described it, like I felt a bit stressed because when I wake up, I want to see what I missed.
Yeah.
Like, I want to catch up. Like how are the emails, the Slack, you know, everything.
I live that
And
life, man.
I cannot wait 1 hour to see the messages.
Yeah.
But it's good. I think you can train on that.
Yeah, and absolutely.
Actually wake up easily and peacefully and slowly. That's very important.
Yeah, and to me it's like either, like, do I want to start my day as a consumer or as a creator? That to me, it was a quote, it's not mine, but that to me was where it clicked to me. It's like, I don't want to be a like mindless drone consumer of somebody else's stuff the first thing that I do, because it locks a direction for the day, I feel.
True.
Actually, yeah. And going back to our discussion before, it's like you wake up and it's like you step back a bit and
Exactly.
you see what are your priorities in the day.
Yeah.
because if you just open your phone and start replying in emails, like it's like you go in a way that you cannot really control.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel there's something also, like if you haven't journaled, there's something that happens because you write slower than you can think. And there's something magical about that, like just slowing it down, because you become so much more clairvoyant in terms of what is important, what is not, having the ability to kind of reflect on stuff, write about stuff that's difficult, or decisions that you're going through, or struggles in life, or just, I practice a lot of gratitude as well. That's a huge thing. Yeah, it's huge, yeah. I want to do more mindfulness and but for me, like the journals serve a similar purpose of kind of slowing down.
Yeah. And you are also focusing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then I think exercise is a huge thing as well. Usually, I try to get away over the lunch.
I do it too. I mean, it gets the stress out.
Yeah,
for sure, and it makes if I have a bad day in terms of my choices. I mean, if I scroll my phone. If I go to the gym, then I feel good. I'm okay. Yeah. I did something productive. I see myself better then.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think perhaps a super small tip that made a big difference for us: stop charging your phone in the bedroom. So we have a cabinet in the kitchen where we have the phone chargers.
Why?
I don't know. It's one is like the blue screen thing. You don't want to sleep with a lot of blue light. So we just read normal books or talk or whatever, so we don't have any digital stuff after 8 p.m. at our house. Also makes you go to sleep way earlier.
It's true.
Yeah. And if you want to have the time in the morning to do the process, you have to go to sleep, because I'm also, one of the things that I love when I started working, like it was a macho culture around I only need 4 hours of sleep and I can work, and that's I love the amount of science that is coming out around sleep, how bad it is that if you don't sleep. So I really try to be really protective of my 8 hours. It makes a huge difference for my ability to think clear, think complex thoughts. Like I'm mentally strong enough that I can force myself through a day even though I haven't slept. But like the quality of the work I do suffers.
Do you approach nutrition the way you approach sleep?
My wife approached nutrition the way that I approach sleep. So that kind of it's a massive difference. I used to, back in my management consultant days, I used to weigh like 15-20 kilos more. Like it was a big difference. And it's diet, it's the amount of alcohol, it's the sleep, it's the exercise, it's a bunch of different things. So yeah, by proxy of my wife, I kind of do, yeah.
Okay, so I would like to come back to your book. You talked before about self-improvement and self-awareness. So there are people that are watching us that are not CEO, they are not CTO or CFO, they're not managers. They are simple people that try to do their best to their lives to find what they should do. Regardless the book, what do you think that could help them?
It's a good question. I think I wish I invested earlier in things that are not clearly professional. So I'm talking about meditation. For me, longer format meditation, like hour, 2 hour stuff, it has been like almost a spiritual path. That has been like, I wish I did that earlier. It would have helped me a lot, especially coming back to what you talked about before, like managing stress, finding clarity in what type of manager am I, what type of professional am I.
1-2 hours straight meditation?
I love that format. Yeah, I've been doing like silent retreats, like 6-day kind of stuff as well. Obviously, that's perhaps not the starting point of it, but for me, that has been. I actually came back. I was at a retreat just a week and a half ago.
Just give a description of your book. So why people should buy it, and what should they expect from it?
Thank you for allowing me to talk about the book. So one thing that I don't think that people think about that much is that the coming decades will bring more change than ever before in human history. Like if you really stop and think about what will work look like in 30 years.
Wow.
So change is something that has a tendency to kind of happen to us, more than we drive it.
impact it.
Yeah. And therefore change becomes very stressful. You don't like change happening to you because you feel forced into stuff, rather than that you see the opportunities in how you can shape change to your benefit. So the book is really it's written as a very concrete handbook in how do you, from a company perspective, affect change. How do you create really clear goal structures within a company? How do you make the bets that you do to become very clear and actionable on all layers of your organization? How do you find these kind of key activities that we talked about before that really meets the kind of 80-20% rule in these are the few things that has a huge impact, and what to look for when designing these? And this doesn't matter if you do it for your personal life or for in a professional role with responsibility of thousands, like the same principles still apply. And then how do you endure change over time? So those are the kind of 4 concepts in the book. And then the book is written, half of it is a pretty traditional management book, like methodology and the reasons why this works and so forth. And half of it is completely fictional. So you follow a set of fictional characters on one of these journeys. And the reason why I did it that way is that I read myself a ton of management books. And the traditional style of it is that you have half of it is methodology and half of it is kind of case studies. But at least to me, I've always seen that these case studies, they're kind of overly polished. Like strategy doesn't look that way in companies, I feel. It's always, I feel it's almost intended to make the author look good. So I wanted to write something that was way more gritty and like this is like the awkward conversations perhaps that you need to have in teams and why you need to have these conversations and the dynamic and how to shape them in a better way. So half of it is fictional, and I think that kind of stands out if you're looking to buy a book on strategy and why should I buy this book. I think that makes it really relatable for a lot of people.
Have you inspired about other books before writing that?
Yeah, I'm a huge reader. For sure, and like the list of books that has inspired this is great. Also, all of the data that I've had on kind of, we do a lot of own research because we have so interesting data on our platform, so we can do more research.
Could you please tell more about that?
So what we do have is the ability. So we see teams from the top level team all the way to the frontline team. What goals do they have? What activities do they run? And what's their ability to kind of accelerate towards their strategy versus a trend? So we can clearly see who are successful and who are not. What are the commonalities between the ones that are successful and the ones that are not? We have the ability, since we have a lot of users on this platform, to also do A/B testing. So we introduce a change to the methodology. So one of the big things that we've done the last few years is try to simplify the methodology. Like how little do I need to teach you in order for that to have effect? Because people don't have the time to learn something complex. So that has been our journey of constant like iterations of like, okay, we take away this rule set and see if it still works. So that has been a big benefit as well. And then we do, one of the things that we do is in our sales process, we have an assessment as kind of the meeting 2 in the sales cycle. So the first meeting is a pretty traditional, this is us, this is what we do. And in the assessment, it's typically done together with the CEO first, and it's a questionnaire, let's call it, of 60 different questions that correlate with financial future performance, and they self-rate. And with that data, we've also been able to do a lot of studies that because that's the self-perception of the CEO. And then we have the real data to kind of see, okay, what's the overlap? How well do they perceive their strengths and their weaknesses? And again, trying to inform us of what do we need to help this specific client with. So it becomes, in reality, it becomes like a baseline for these clients from which we can start to improve. And part of the assessment is you get a score, like you have a 42% likelihood of hitting your financial targets in 3 years. And if you want to increase that likelihood, these are the 4 or 5 things that you need to change now. So that's the assessment tool. And then obviously the studies are across multiple assessments, and we've done 500-600 of these assessments by now. So that also, it's because it's almost an hour deep interview, but it's structured with a CEO. So we have that data, which is pretty interesting. Like, it's not that many studies that has that deep access to that many CEOs. So we can see, like, industry-wide, or like this is something that everybody seems to struggle with, no matter industry, or this is very industry-specific and stuff like that.
So there are a lot of people that are watching that video and they are younger from you, 18, 22, or maybe 16 years old. What do you suggest them to do? What do they focus to?
I think one of the things that I thought a lot about in my early career is like a principle that I only want my manager to hear my name in the context of something good. So I think that's a pretty simple but effective like strategy very early on in a career. What you want to do is, like, at the end of the day, you're in a team and you want to do the same thing, and we're all, like, it doesn't matter if you think you define it as my job is to make my manager look good or not, but the simple truth is that you're very dependent on senior people looking out for you in your early career, give you your first chance. So if you really want to make a career, the thing is that you need to be ahead of track versus other people your age. And in order to be that, you need older people to look to you with a really positive eye. So that was kind of my mantra initially, and I invested a lot of time in my career early on. I've reaped the benefit of that later on. So I got kids when I was roughly 30. I'm very happy that I was at a point when I actually got kids that I had a career to lean on by that time. So on the one hand, I wish I traveled more when I was younger, before I had kids. So these two advices go completely against each other. I just realized, and maybe that's fine, maybe that's life, right? But on the one hand, I wish I didn't take life as seriously as I did early on. On the other hand, I had so many benefits as a consequence that I took it really seriously early on.
That's the trade-off.
Yeah, it is. You can't win, right?
You have to sacrifice something, and or you have more experiences and maybe relaxed life early on, or you work more in your 20s to 30s, and you harness the results after 30 years old.
Yeah. One thing to really not do, I think if you're early in your career, you should be really humble in terms of, like, I'm here to learn. Really nothing's, like, I'm not better than whatever task this is. I think just being that guy in the team or girl who's the yes person is such an awesome way to just get your manager to like you, to be honest. And it's not you're not trying to optimize short term, you're trying to optimize over like a 3-year horizon by that time. And if you're always like, if I have a younger employee that might not be as skillful, but is always like super positive, digging deep, working hard, I love that person. It's such a nice person to be a manager of. And of course I'm going to try to look out for that person, and whenever I have a promotion to give, like, I will try to like, it's like, you hire for attitude, you teach for skills. I think that makes a ton of sense. Like, attitude is huge, especially early in a career.
So I would like your point of view. When I started working in other people, I found that very useful, that I make a lot of improvement to myself. If I ask a real question about how can I do that better, how can I help that to a better direction, I'd like to ask about startups, how could make the people wonder about those kind of questions.
Wow, I don't know. I don't think it's a startup unique thing. I think it's, again, coming back to like basic leadership principles. I think it's a give and take between a manager and an employee. You have to play the long game with employees and with managers. Like if I'm looking out as a manager just for me, like it's gonna be pretty quickly apparent that I don't really care, and why should they? So if you're the founder of a startup, for example, it can be really easy to get just wrapped up in your thing, right? But it comes back to like people and caring genuinely about people and being authentic, and I don't know really other than that. Like,
what about the culture about doing something better? I mean, not just the work I have to do, to think about out of the box. I mean, your employees. Do you want to think about out of the box? Of course you do, I think.
Yeah, but that's also like a trade-off, as we talked about just now. Like you want to experiment, but the question is how much, because like you can't have everybody experimenting all of the time. One of the key problems of startups is that you pivot so much that you have a problem to understand the decisions that we took. Do we see the effects of the decisions, or that we're constantly pivoting? So you need to kind of stick the route for some time in order for you to really see the effects of decisions that you're taking. And that can be really difficult in like the startup environment. Because you also, like, one of the benefits that you have in a startup environment is how quickly you can pivot. So you need to lean into that as well. I don't know if there's a magic rule, to be honest. I don't know.
I guess it depends a lot on the size of the company as well, and like in what level you are an employee. You are a manager in a top level position, you are more down. I don't want to call it a pyramid, but I mean, it depends on how much you affect the organizations, because big corporations, they have established some processes. They want some of their employees to keep iterating the same process, because if they are experimenting too much, that can create some risks for the company. On the other hand, you don't have so much innovation, and that's why I think we tend to see that big corporations cannot move fast into innovation.
Yeah.
That's why maybe startups need a lot of experimentation and thinking out of the box a lot, and give their employees the freedom to make tons of mistakes.
Yeah. And I think that's actually true for all companies. You need to allow the freedom to make mistakes. There are multiple types of mistakes, obviously. It can be mistakes from I didn't care enough, and that's something that's always going to be a negative. But I took a bet to the best of my ability and it failed. That's something that's pretty positive, and like I love the kind of fail fast idea. Like if you're going to introduce risk, how quickly can you see if this risk pays off or not? Especially when it comes to like new business ideas. One of the problems is, so you might have customer interviews that says, yeah, I really want that, when you have it. So if you can just, for example, in a startup environment, can you put something down more than a letter of intent or something? Can you almost be like a Kickstarter supporter here? Because as soon as you have some type of financial bridge, it's so much more solid that this is a good idea. And what you'll find a lot of times when you're doing these kind of really early on interviews is that everybody will say, yes, this is a good idea. Because it sounds kind of cool, but are you willing to pay for it? That's the thing. That's what will get you revenue. So if you can force the conversation around, are you willing to pay for it as soon as possible? That's very beneficial in terms of your ability to fail fast. And that's how you manage risk when it comes to innovation.
So, in 10 years, AI, Internet of Things, metaverse, big data, gonna change the world, all combined. You said about in your book that you analyze a lot of cases about all of that. Where should the companies focus?
I don't know if this is an answer to the question, but one of the things that's currently frustrating building products that are AI enabled is that it's very cheap to build an MVP, and it's way more expensive than me or anybody in my engineering teams thought to build a full-on commercial product, because the slight error rates that when you're using AI through a chatbot doesn't really matter, like the mistakes they make doesn't really matter. But if you're building it through an API with like JSON to JSON communication, then it's like those small variations create so many headaches. So the engineering environment around, I think ChatGPT is a little bit better than Google Gemini currently, like how to build towards these products. But I think they're not at the level where we will see. I've been wondering so much, why don't we see more really, really useful AI tools yet? And I think that's part of the answer, that they're still very complex to build really good products with. I expect that to change.
Capital as well. It needs a lot of energy.
Yeah, for sure, but they seem to fund that. Like, the problem isn't at like Microsoft or the Google level. They seem to fund that. Obviously, from a macro perspective, it's a huge moral question as well. I got like one prompt. I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard it from a friend of mine. So that one prompt takes 7 iPhone batteries of energy to respond to. I've never thought about it that way. I heard, like, a few years ago, I heard one response cost roughly $16, and that as well in terms of, like, I don't know how many thousands of prompts that I've put into ChatGPT, but like the cost side of it is huge.
The costs tend to lower and lower.
Absolutely. But the thing is, currently we're increasing the capability as well. So currently, even though like the cost for the old prompt might be going down, we're increasing the complexity of the model right now. So it's so difficult to really foresee what work will look like in 10 years. I have no idea.
You have heard the discussions that they want to build nuclear factories for powering these machines.
No, I've actually not.
No? Yeah.
I mean, energy is obviously on everybody's lips, especially, I don't know how it is in Greece right now, but especially last year we had a huge spike in energy cost in Sweden.
Yeah.
It's a little bit better this year. I don't know why, because I don't think that we've actually built any more energy plants, to be honest, but...
Right, and I would like to ask you now, how can someone buy your book? Where they can find you, if they want also some feedback on it, or if they want to ask some question. But first of all, which are the main platforms?
So the main platform for international audience are going to be kind of the usual suspects in terms of Amazon and stuff like that, right? So in any major bookstore, you'll find it. It's called The Execution Revolution. The idea with the name is that I think that the ability to, since the external environment is going to change more often, so the ability as a company to pivot successfully and start executing aligned in a new direction, there'll be such a competitive advantage if you become good at execution. So that's the idea behind the execution revolution. It's not necessarily just the best innovators that are going to win, but also the ones that are able to kind of pivot like that. If you want to follow me, I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. So I currently, at least, I center most of my social platforms around LinkedIn. I do have a web page as well, which is a little bit longer format stuff, like articles and stuff like that. If you're more into the kind of details and the behind the scenes stuff, maybe for the hardcore audience, and it's johangrönstedt.com.
We will also add in the description your social media account.
Yeah, fantastic.
And the Amazon link, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Perfect. And last question, out of curiosity, actually, you said in the morning you start journaling.
Yeah.
That is the time when you write your book, or in journaling you just write random thoughts that help you?
So the journal is deeply connected to why I wrote the book. So what happens when you journal is that it's going to be different every day. And sometimes I had the feeling of like I was close to a really cool insight, and I wanted to go back and revisit it, but I never did. I like needed to write like new stuff. So the initial idea with the book was, can I refine these ideas down to the very core essence to make it as simple to understand as possible, but still powerful? So that was the idea with the book, that I just wanted to write like the best version of what I was working with. And then the book, honestly, I've gotten a lot of questions. How long does it take to write a book?
Depends, of course.
Yeah.
How much?
So it's like depends on how you want to look at it. It's 15 years of experience, but it's a summer of writing. So like once you actually know what you're talking about, it can be pretty quick, but you have to have something to write about in order for that to be true. So it was very like, hey, write a book. It's an awesome process. It's really creative as a creative outlet. So I wrote it in the mornings before my kids woke, and in the afternoons after the house went to sleep, and maybe an hour or two over lunch. But it was June to August kind of thing. And then obviously it goes through a couple of rounds of editing from publishers and stuff like that. So that process is like a year long before it's actually a book in a store, right?
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Having us.
Thanks for having me.
This discussion, and I think I found it personally very valuable. I hope you guys find it as well, and thank you for watching.